Greetings and welcome to the Dr. J Vlog series. It is Tuesday, April 8th, 2025, and on Tuesdays we look into music and the arts. Yeah, that's the opening few chords from a second song off of my debut album, 62 Since 62, and that's from Beauty, Truth, and Light. So all of nature consists of waves and energy, but just in different forms. Okay, so waves transport energy by carrying vibrations. And there are two basic types of waves, mechanical and electromagnetic. So mechanical waves are disturbances that travel through a medium, transporting energy from one place to another. The medium is simply the material through which the disturbance is moving and can be thought of as a series of interconnecting particles. In contrast, electromagnetic waves or light waves can travel through a vacuum. And a couple of other general principles to bear in mind. The higher the amplitude, the displacement of the wave from a resting position or fixed point, the more energy that the wave carries. And also, the greater the frequency of the wave, the more energy. All right? So think of it just in terms of, like a guitar. If you're just playing something, and then if I pick up the pace, so you can see that more energetic playing, or as I start picking up the pace, the frequency with which I'm hitting the chords, it's taking me more energy, and in turn, there's more music, there's more energy being conveyed through the music. And so we literally can talk about high energy versus low energy music or variations of the theme. Okay? So, and then we can talk about different wavelengths, which is the distance from crest to crest or from trough to trough. Actually, there are different ways you can measure the wavelengths, but this applies specifically to transverse waves. And then you also have compression waves. You can also measure this from compression to compression with longitudinal waves. Okay, so anyway, don't worry about that. But and then you have wave frequencies, which are given by the number of waves that pass through a fixed point per unit of time. Okay, typically measured in hertz. That's after the scientist, hertz. Basically, 1 hertz is equal to 1 wave passing a fixed point in time per second. Okay, and so we know a lot about water waves and seismic waves and sound waves as per music. And we know a lot about electromagnetic or light waves as well. So sound waves then are the key feature that we're going to be looking at here for the rest of the day. And specifically, of course, because they're so crucial to music, right? So, and sound is a mechanical wave that's created by vibrating objects, as you've heard here. Again, propagated through some kind of a medium across space and time. So the most common medium for sound waves would typically be air, right? And that allows us then to communicate, verbally, musically, etc., by creating these disturbances. And these particles then are interconnected, and they pass along, they move from the original source of the sound wave, and then that's what we're sort of evolutionarily designed to hear through our ears. So there has to be some source, some kind of vibrating object to disturb the first particle of the medium. And then the disturbance created by it can be, a range of different sources. It can be the vibrating vocal cords of the person, like when you hear me speaking, right? The vibrating strings of the guitar, when you hear me playing the guitar, or a violin, or it could be a piano, whatever. The vibrating tines of a tuning fork, the vibrating diaphragm, of a radio speaker, and so on. So, and then the sound waves then are transported from one location to another by means of this sort of particle-to-particle interaction. And if the sound wave is then moving through air, then as one air particle is displaced from its equilibrium position, it affects the nearest neighbors, causing them to be displaced as well. And this particle interaction continues throughout the entire medium, with each particle interacting and then causing a disturbance in the nearest neighbor, etc. And then eventually it reaches our ears. Okay, so again, I've used the example of the guitar. The guitar is really interesting too, because obviously it involves the plucking or the striking of the strings of the guitar that gives us that particular sound, whatever that might be. Okay, and the vibrating guitar string essentially is forcing the surrounding air molecules to be compressed and expanded, creating a pressure disturbance. And that's what you're hearing. It travels again from particle to particle through the air medium here, or even electronically when it's transmitted over the waves, air waves, that sort of thing. And we're always transporting energy as this thing moves through space. The amount of energy that is transferred to the medium is dependent upon the amplitude of the vibration of the guitar strings in this case. And so if more energy is put into the plucking or the playing of the strings, then the string will vibrate with greater amplitude. And the greater the amplitude of the vibration of the guitar imparts more energy to the medium, creating more air particles to be displaced, etc. And then the amplitude of the vibration of the particles, as that's increased, this corresponds to the increased amount of energy that's being carried by the particles. All right. All right, but there's more to it, obviously. Okay, so now let's talk about the underlying mathematics of why the sounds sound the way that they do. Okay, not just the energy that's being transferred, but in standard guitar tuning, for example, six-string guitar, which is what I have here, the standard tuning is the notes, and again, I never learned to read music, so I kind of had to figure all this out by trial and error, and then just listening to other people, and occasionally looked at things online, etc. But anyway, the standard tuning for a guitar, six-string guitar in conventional Western music, is the lowest note is an E. Okay, and again, each note vibrates at a distinct or a different frequency, again measured in hertz. So again, here's the basic logic of so the thickest string, the lowest string on the guitar is the E. Okay, that vibrates at 82.41 hertz. Okay, and then the next string up is the A, and that vibrates at 110 hertz roughly. And then D is the next string, and the D vibrates at 146.83 hertz. The G is 196 hertz. The B is 246.94 hertz. And then finally, the high E, 329.63 hertz. So those are the 6 strings. Okay? And then we can ask, well, why did the notes sound the way that they do, and which ones sound good together and which ones don't sound so good together? So I'm going to start at the low E string here. Okay, and that has a certain sound to it. And then I'm going to go up exactly 1 octave to a higher E. And you see how that sounds related? So you have a low E, and then a high E, well, 1 octave up, okay? And then I'm going to go up to the next E. So now I've played 3 E's. 1, and they all sound basically the same, don't they? Because they're all the same note. They're E notes. But what are they doing? They're at different octaves, different frequencies. But the reason that they all sound like E's is because there's a mathematical foundation underlying each of these notes. Okay, so the low E, again, is vibrating at 82.4 hertz. Okay? And then when we go up one octave, we are literally doubling that 82.41 hertz to 164.82 hertz. It's exactly double the ratio. Look it up. All right. And then when we go up to the next E, that high E, this is the first string on the guitar there, that high E, that's, again, a doubling. You've gone from here, that E at 164.82 hertz, roughly, rounding, up to 329.63-ish hertz. So once again, we've doubled the hertz, okay? And the frequencies, therefore, all right? Okay, and then when we put it all together, I'm just going to play an E chord just for a moment. Oops, that's not an E chord. Here's an E chord. So that E chord sounds pretty good, you know. It sounds, oh, that sounds like something, right? And if we strum harder, as I say, we're imparting more energy, right? And as we impart more energy that's transported across an area through this particular medium per unit time, it sounds louder. We've increased the intensity of the sound wave. Or more simply, we're just being louder. We've cranked up the volume. And then now play it softly. So, so the greater the amplitude of the vibrations of the particles in the particular medium, the greater the rate at which the energy is being transported, the more intense the sound wave, and so on. So now, again, what you heard was me playing the E chord, and the question is, well, why do some notes sound good together and others not so good? So again, that always depends on the frequency of their vibrations. It's just like the Beach Boys, you know. I'm thinking of a good vibration. He's giving me excitation. You know, it's all about the vibrations. That is to say, but it's not just good vibrations. It's literally the ratios of the notes that are being played are stunningly, mathematically perfect. Okay, so if we look at the A ratio, like the A note, here's the A. Okay, so that's an A, and here's an A above it. Again, that's a perfect octave. And the point is if you look at the ratio, for that perfect octave, the notes, of course, sound the same because they're in a perfect ratio of 2 to 1. So this higher is vibrating at a frequency exactly twice that of the lower A. So they're both A's, but one's an octave higher. Okay, so that's a perfect octave. And the notes sound exactly the same, but just one's higher, one's lower. So then if you get a perfect ratio of, if you have a ratio, so that's a ratio of 2 to 1. So then what if you have a ratio of 3 to 2? You get something that's called a perfect fifth. So if you're looking in the scale, the key of A, there's 7 notes in the major scale. And if you go to the fifth note in that scale, that's called a perfect fifth. Okay? And so, but there's a mathematical ratio in terms of the vibrations. So that 3 to 2 ratio, right? It was 2 to 1 for an octave. Now we go 3 to 2. That becomes a perfect fifth, meaning that if one note vibrates at a certain frequency, then the note that's a perfect fifth above that will vibrate at this 3 to 2 ratio. Okay, so in this instance with A, the perfect fifth for A, oops, that's not it. Let me get the A. Here's the A. Okay, that's the A. And then the perfect fifth is the E. Okay? Those sound pretty good together, don't they? Well, the reason they sound pretty good together is because that's a perfect fifth, the A and the E. So that ratio then is 3 to 2. And that's true of every perfect fifth in every scale, okay? In every key, I should say. All right. So that's what they sound like together. Okay. Well, what about a ratio of 4 to 3 instead of 3 to 2? When we go to a ratio of 4 to 3, now we've got something called a perfect fourth, meaning that if one note vibrates at a certain frequency, okay, then the note that's a perfect fourth will vibrate at a ratio of 4 to 3. And that would be, in this case, A to D. Okay, so here's the A, and here's the D. See how that's slightly different? But that's a perfect fourth. Still sounds good. That's the fourth, and this is the fifth. Fourth, fifth. Okay? Both sound good, but they're slightly different because of the frequency ratios differ. All right? And then, yes, you can have a ratio then of 5 to 4. 5 to 4 would be a perfect third, meaning that if one note vibrates at a certain frequency, the note that's a perfect third above it will vibrate at a 5 to 4 ratio. Okay? So in the case of A, that note is a C sharp. Okay? All three of those go together. That's the first note, the third, and the fifth. A, C sharp, and E. Okay? So that's what makes for a full-blown chord when we put all of those notes together. All right? The A, the C sharp, and the E. And these are in perfect vibrational frequency ratios relative to each other. And that's why it sounds good or harmonious to our ears. Okay? All of those notes, all of those strings that I'm playing are from A major, and they all include the root note, the first note in the key, the A, and they also include the thirds and the fifths, meaning they include A's and C sharps and E's. And all of these go together. And they all form a perfect major chord. But again, the reason it sounds so good is because there are these underlying mathematical ratios. Okay? Well, they're all in perfect vibrational frequencies together. All right? And it goes even further. What if we have a ratio of, say, 6 to 5? So we've gone from 2 to 1, a perfect octave, to 3 to 2. We've gone the fifth, and 4 to 3. We've found a perfect fourth. And then we've gone 5 to 4, which is a perfect third. And what if we go 6 to 5? Sounds a little bit odd, but again, think of it in terms of a perfect ratio. We're changing the ratio or the sound proportionally so that we've gone from a major to a minor. It's still a nice, tidy mathematical relationship, but now instead of going from A to C sharp, okay, instead we're going from A to C, and that's different. It's a little bit lower, right? And what's really cool is when we play it together, we get a new sound altogether. So this is the standard A major chord with all of the relative proportions that I just described. And then if we change that 1 so that we include a 6 to 5 ratio instead of 5 to 4 and so on, like the standard ones, if we just change that one note from the C sharp to C, listen to what happens. We go from A major. I'm just changing the one note, going from here to here, and now this is what it sounds like. And that's A minor. So A major, you hear the difference. It's a change in the vibrational frequency, layered in with the other frequencies. But again, they all sound good together, and they give you different sounds. And so every single combination that sounds good together or clean or involves notes with perfect mathematical relationships to one another. Okay? I'm going to give you one more example. This is called an A7th chord. So here's A major, and here's A7. It has a little bit of a jazzier sound to it. Yeah, because all we've done, it has all the same usual notes that I've mentioned, right? The A, the C sharp, and the E. Plus, we've added one more note. We've added a G. So it has the A, the C sharp, the E, and the G. Okay? And that G has a 9-to-10 ratio relative to A, the G versus the A. Okay? And so that's why it still sounds good, but a little different still. So basically, every single combination of notes or chords that sound good together have some underlying mathematical relationship that links them together into what I call a perfect musical equation. All right? And then what happens if we break the formula and we don't include notes that have perfect ratios with one another? Okay? So we start to randomize the combinations of the different notes. That doesn't sound so good, does it? I don't even know what I'm playing. I just randomly put my fingers down. Okay? But the reason that that doesn't sound good is because now I'm playing different notes that have different frequency ratios, but they don't align mathematically. And that's the difference. Okay? So yeah, it's really, I mean, in fact, we say, oh, that's dissonant, or we say, well, that's noise. And the reason it's noise is because to our ears, we're not hearing that perfect resolution of that consonant, or I'm calling that perfect mathematical equation that links different notes together in a nice harmonious way. You get different sounds, different melodic feelings, different emotive expressions, but they all sound good and yet slightly different. Why? Because they all contain notes that have relative mathematical proportions that are in perfect ratios to one another. Okay? And by the way, this is just for the standard 12-note distributions in conventional Western music. There are actually a variety of other musical scales and systems in different parts of the world, and these have ratios too, but they can sound quite different from Western music, okay? And the reason is, of course, because they are built upon other types of scales that are actually more complex in many instances, not always, but they have more notes that sort of fall in between the standard notes of Western music, okay? And so if you grew up with Western music, for example, and the musical scales and notations, then that's going to sound very natural to you, right? And that's what I call our musical first language. And so, but then there are these different musical scales. Again, different parts of the world, different cultures. The maqams are systems of musical scales that are used in the Middle East that are defined by quarter tones instead of what we call half tones in Western music. Right? That's a chromatic scale. We go up by what we call a half tone each time. Well, with the Middle Eastern system, the maqam, there are intervals that differ and that fill in some of the gaps between. There's actually frequencies in between those half steps that are quarter tones, like literally halfway in between. And that gives different pitches, different sounds, and so forth. And so to the Western ear, though, this is going to sound very, very different, very unusual, and it's going to sound almost like a musical foreign language. And Indian classical music has 22 notes within the standard octave. Again, we have 7 notes in an octave, or 8 notes from from low E to high E, right? So if we go up in the standard Western scales, we oops. So those are the standard notes in E. But in Western scales, again, we have 7 major notes for each octave, or 8 notes from octave to octave inclusive, right? In Indian classical music, you've got 22 notes per octave. So that's remarkable. And so you're going to create vastly different sounds, okay? Because you're also using ratios that are quite different and that most Westerners simply don't know, right? Okay, well, anyway, all of this will be for another vlog and for another day. For those of us who grew up with Western music, though, it's actually quite simple then to identify the sounds that go together and those that don't, right? And most people can hear it right away when they play an instrument or they sing some notes, all right? Or in my case, my wife, for example, might be practicing on the violin, and I'll immediately be able to tell, for example, if her instrument's out of tune. Why? Because she's playing and I'm expecting to hear a certain frequency or a certain series of notes, and it may sound off. Now, I'm not talking about when you make a mistake, like I just made a moment ago. We all make mistakes. I'm talking about because the instrument isn't tuned properly, okay? And so they're not going together. The notes aren't flowing together actually because of the tuning, okay? And if tuning is off, then that means we're not playing the notes with the precise or the proper frequencies or vibrations, and it sounds off. Okay, that happens all the time. This is why I always keep this, I don't know if you can see that there, the red, I keep that little tuning device handy because as I play for a little while, the guitar starts to get a little bit out of tune and you can hear it. And so I have to go back and turn this on and what it's doing, it's measuring the vibrations and making sure that I'm getting the right vibrations within a certain range. Maybe not perfect, but very close. So much so that you probably couldn't even hear it if it were just a tiny bit out of tune. All right. Now, again, I promised to dive into David Bowie next week. I was going to do it this week, but I just wanted to get started with the long-term dive into the frequencies and the perfections and the imperfections that we hear in music, because these are both literal and metaphorical in terms of the implications for consonance or dissonance that we hear in music, that we hear amongst human beings who are trying to communicate with one another, and that we hear in nature. And so most important, we process sounds all the time from nature because everything vibrates and gives off energy. And so in that sense, our ultimate challenge consists of being able to understand and connect with the vibrations and the rhythms of nature. And when we don't connect, where the vibes just don't feel right, I'd argue that there's something quite deep that underlies our ability to communicate and resonate with one another, okay? So people, again, may be speaking completely different languages. They don't understand each other linguistically. They may be communicating with certain sounds and frequencies musically with which we're not familiar. And so that sounds off to us, or it sounds different, or we don't understand. We can't interpret it the same way because it lies outside of our realm of knowledge and common experience and expression. Or they may be giving off energy that's just too intense, or that doesn't match our energy and our wave functions, right? And so we end up, canceling each other out. Or there's, again, some kind of a dissonance. Anyway, I say all this not to be funny, but there's actually truly deep connections and a much deeper truth to all of this stuff that I hope to reveal through the vlog series over time and through the different subject matters, which do all ultimately and in the end connect with one another. But it takes time. It took me over 6 decades to get to where I am and to be able to understand nature's equations to the extent that I do, and human equations to the extent that I do. And what I found then is that I now have a much better understanding and a deeper wisdom about the nature of nature and humanities. And yet I've still got much more to learn, okay? But I have a lot now that I can share in this regard, and I hope you'll stick with me and continue along this journey. In the meantime, as ever, may you and yours continue to create peace in your lives, nurture love in your hearts, and as always, share hugs in abundance with one another. All right? And hopefully, we'll see you very soon to talk about other musical stuff and other subjects that are related mathematically and musically to our abilities to communicate and understand nature. We'll see you soon.